They looked like progress. They promised freedom. But behind the wheel, they were ticking time bombs, deadly design flaws, catastrophic failures, and tragic consequences. These 12 cars didn't just break, they killed. Sold to millions, trusted by families, and now they stand as grim reminders of how deadly a bad car can be. The 1970 Plymouth Sport Fury GT440 is the kind of car that, once you hear its name, demands you to lean in a little closer, because behind its enormous body and polished chrome lies one of the most intriguing contradictions of the muscle car era. How could something so massive move so violently fast? How did Plymouth expect people to control this land-going missile with brakes barely suited for a golf cart? Why did only a handful of brave souls dare to buy it new? And why do the few surviving owners today speak about it with a mix of awe, terror, and love that borders on reverence? From the very beginning, the Sport Fury GT posed a riddle. It wasn't built for economy, practicality, or even subtlety. Instead, it was a monument to American excess, a full-size luxury car that secretly wanted to race. It was the equivalent of putting a linebacker in a sprinter's starting blocks and shouting, "Go!" Nobody was sure what would happen, but everyone knew it would be unforgettable. Under the endless hood, the 440 Super Commando V8 sat like a loaded cannon. When you put your foot down, it didn't politely accelerate. It launched the massive body forward, snapping your head back against the seat in a way that seemed impossible for a car weighing nearly 4,400 pounds. Owners remember that first blast of acceleration vividly. One original owner, who bought his Sport Fury GT brand new in the summer of 1970, laughed when recalling it. The salesman said, "It's quick for its size." He didn't say it would feel like being shot out of a slingshot with no parachute. But then came the panic, because the suspension, soft, loose, and tuned for comfort, allowed the big Plymouth to sway and float at high speeds. The steering wheel, light as a feather, offered no real idea of where the front wheels were actually pointed. And the brakes, unless you were lucky enough to get the rare front disc option, were the same kind used on your grandpa's Sunday cruiser. One brave owner summed it up chillingly. At 100 miles an hour, you weren't driving it. You were just trying to survive it. What made someone walk into a Plymouth dealership and say, "Yes, I want that missile disguised as a living room"? Was it the promise of power? The feeling of being king of the road? Or maybe the sheer thrill of laughing in the face of reason? A man who had hunted down a Sport Fury GT after decades of searching gave a simple answer. "I didn't want a car that made sense. I wanted one that made stories." And oh, the stories they made. Tales of unexpected drag races against roadrunners and Chevelles. Stories of crossing entire states in a day, the big 440 humming contentedly at 90 miles per hour, swallowing fuel faster than a battleship, but never once feeling strained. Stories of heart-stopping moments when the brakes faded and the car seemed destined to sail straight into the horizon. One unforgettable memory came from a former street racer who remembered lining up against a much lighter Nova SS. He laughed when he saw me in that boat, but when the lights turned green, all he saw was my taillights and me hanging on for dear life. Even among muscle car enthusiasts, the Sport Fury GT became a sort of legend. It wasn't just fast, it was impossibly fast for what it was. It wasn't just dangerous, it was exhilarating in a way that modern, sanitized performance cars could never hope to replicate. It had a spirit of defiance against physics, against good judgment, against conformity. Yet by 1970, the writing was already on the wall. Insurance premiums for muscle cars were skyrocketing. Gasoline prices were creeping upward. Emissions regulations were looming. In that climate, a 440-powered full-size beast was an endangered species even as it was born. Only 666 Sport Fury GTs were built that year, and very few survive today. Those that do are cherished, not because they are practical or collectible or easy to drive, but because they represent a moment when car companies still built machines that shouldn't exist, but somehow did. One collector, polishing his perfectly restored Sport Fury GT at a show, said it best with a glint of pride and mischief in his eye. People ask me, why would anyone buy one of these monsters? And I just smile and tell them, because once you hear that 440 roar under that endless hood, you realize you'll never want anything smaller or safer ever again. Would you like me to continue and paint an even deeper picture? Maybe imagine a wild night in 1970 when a brand new Sport Fury GT took on a street race against a Mustang Boss 302. I could build a full, vivid scene for you if you want. The 1968 Dodge Dart GTS 440 was one of those wonderful acts of rebellion that seemed to happen only in the late 1960s when car makers let engineers loose with a simple directive: make it faster, make it louder, and don't ask too many questions. Somebody at Dodge took that commandment very seriously, so seriously that they crammed the mighty 440 cubic inch Magnum V8, normally reserved for full-size bruisers like the Charger RT and the GTX, into the humble compact Dart. And what they created wasn't just a fast car. They created a monster barely held in check by thin sheet metal, bias ply tires, and the nerves of whoever was crazy enough to hold the wheel. How could they possibly think it was a good idea to stuff one of the biggest, heaviest big blocks of the era into one of the smallest cars Dodge made? Was it raw horsepower envy? Was it Dodge's way of flipping the bird to GM's 400 cubic inch limit on intermediate cars? Maybe it was just pure, beautiful madness. As one surviving owner, laughing through his words, once said, "You didn't drive a Dart 440. You held on and you prayed." Under the flat, almost unassuming hood beat the heart of a giant. The 440 Magnum made a claimed 375 horsepower and 480 pound-feet of torque. But everyone who drove one swore those numbers were sandbagged. Slam the skinny accelerator pedal to the floor, and the Dart leapt forward like a wild animal unleashed. It could rip off low 13-second quarter-mile times straight from the showroom, numbers that embarrassed much more expensive muscle cars of the day. But that performance came at a price, and the Dart GTS 440 made sure you felt every bit of it. With almost no weight over the rear wheels and that brutal V8 up front, the car was violently nose-heavy. Throttle inputs weren't so much requests as challenges. A little too much gas in a corner, and the Dart would snap into sudden, savage oversteer. "It didn't just step out," said one former street racer. "It tried to swap ends with you like it was pissed off you even dared to touch the wheel." Rear tires vanished in a haze of smoke if you weren't careful, and often even if you were. And trying to drive it smoothly was like trying to carry a lit firework across a minefield. One wrong move and things got exciting. Fast. The brakes, designed for a much lighter and tamer car, were woefully inadequate for stopping all that mass and momentum. Steering was heavy and slow compared to smaller engine Darts, and the suspension, though beefed up a little, still wasn't truly up to the task of managing 440 pounds of iron pushing the front axle into submission. Dodge had effectively built a street-legal dragster, but left it wearing its Sunday best and pretending it was still a grocery getter. And yet, that's exactly what made the Dart GTS 440 so intoxicating. It was a secret weapon, a ticking time bomb of horsepower hidden inside an unassuming compact. Pull up next to a Dart at a red light, and if you weren't paying attention, if you missed the subtle hood scoops or the tiny GTS badges, you might think you were about to dust some high school kid's hand-me-down economy car. And you'd be wrong, devastatingly wrong. Those lucky or reckless enough to own one still speak of it with a mix of fear and pride. One original owner remembered the first time he let a friend borrow his Dart 440 for a quick spin around the block. The friend returned 15 minutes later, wide-eyed, white-knuckled, and muttering, "That's not a car, that's a weapon." Even within Dodge, the Dart GTS 440 carried a certain underground reputation. Officially, the factory never made a production 440 Dart in 19C. It didn't. The 440 Darts were mostly dealer-installed specials, or extremely limited COPO, Central Office Production Order, cars. A handful of them were built by select dealers like Mr. Norm's Grand Spalding Dodge in Chicago, a name that still carries legendary status among Mopar faithful today. These cars were often little more than regular Dart GTS 383 models that had their small blocks yanked out and replaced with the monstrous 440s, along with the necessary beefed-up K-member, heavy-duty cooling, and reinforced driveline parts to survive the abuse. But the real question is, why would anyone drive such a wild, unbalanced, fire-breathing beast on the street, day after day? Was it the need to dominate local drag strips? Was it the feeling of knowing you had an ace up your sleeve at every stoplight? Or was it simply because in an era when limits were for lesser men, owning a Dart GTS 440 meant you were playing a different, much faster game? An aging Mopar fanatic, now well into his 70s, grinned when asked what it was like to live with one of these unpredictable monsters. "You didn't own a Dart 440, he said. It owned you, and you loved every second of it once your heart started beating again." The 1973 Mercury Cougar R7 351 Cobra Jet is one of those strange, beautiful contradictions that could have only happened during the long, chaotic hangover after the muscle car party of the late 60s. By 1973, the Cougar had traded its growl for a purr, morphing from a lean, street-fighting pony car into a personal luxury cruiser dripping in chrome, thick carpets, opera windows, and vinyl roofs. Mercury had decided it was time for refinement, not rebellion. And yet, almost as if the engine department didn't get the memo, they dropped a 351 Cobra Jet under the hood anyway, giving the Cougar a brawler's heart trapped inside a lounge singer's suit. It immediately begs the question, what happens when you put a serious performance engine into a chassis tuned for soft rides and lazy cornering? The answer was the 1973 Cougar XR7 351 Cobra Jet, a glamorous, glittering death trap with just enough muscle underfoot to get you into trouble faster than you could fix your hair. The 351 Cobra Jet was no joke, even in 1973's tightening emissions world. Officially rated at 264 horsepower, net, not gross thanks to new regulations, it still packed strong internals. A beefy bottom end, large valve heads, and a 4-barrel carb. Drop the hammer, and the Cougar lunged forward with a surprising ferocity, the rear tires howling in protest as the softly sprung rear end squatted low and the long nose clawed at the sky. It could sprint to 60 mph in about 7.5 seconds, and in a straight line, it had the guts to dust most of the increasingly strangled competition. But what about when the road turned? That's where the reality check came. The suspension was tuned for boulevard cruising, not canyon carving. The body rolled like a ship in heavy seas, and the steering, overboosted and vague, turned high-speed cornering into a game of blind faith. As one exasperated owner put it, it wasn't turn the wheel and the car turns. It was turn the wheel, wait 3 seconds, and pray you're still alive. Braking was no less terrifying. Though disc brakes were optional, most cars still relied on old-school drums, which faded fast when you really needed them. The Cougar's extra weight, creeping toward 4,000 pounds fully loaded, didn't help matters either. Once you got it up to speed, stopping was more suggestion than certainty. Another veteran Cougar owner, shaking his head with a rueful smile, remembered, "The first time I tried to drive it like a Mustang, I learned real quick. The Cougar doesn't dance, it stumbles, and then tries to kill you." Yet for all its flaws, the 73 XR7 351 Cobra Jet had an undeniable charisma. It was gorgeous in that over-the-top, early 70s way. Sharp nose, hot-a-la-Haiti lights, sweeping lines, chrome-laden grille, and that distinctive XR7 badge that promised something a little more special. Inside, it was a rolling living room. Thick seats, faux wood galore, a clock set into the dashboard like a piece of jewelry. It coddled you even as it threatened your life at full throttle. And maybe that was the appeal. You could cruise in smooth, decadent comfort, looking like a rock star on Sunset Boulevard. But if someone pulled up next to you at a light, smirking from behind the wheel of a Camaro or a Challenger, you could bury your right foot and leave them wondering what the hell just happened. You could go fast, just as long as you didn't mind going out like a Roman candle if the road turned nasty. Those who owned one didn't pretend it was a purebred muscle car. They knew better. They embraced its weird duality. One longtime XR7 owner described it perfectly. It was too heavy to race, too pretty to ignore, and too powerful to drive safely. It was like dating a beautiful disaster. You knew it was gonna end badly, but you couldn't stay away. Would you like me to create a dramatic late-night scene where a 73 Cougar XR7 351 CJ lines up against a 72 Chevy SS at a deserted intersection under flickering streetlights? I could really make the characters and tension come alive if you want. The 1970 Chevrolet Kingswood Estate 454 wagon was one of those rare, glorious, utterly insane moments when Detroit's more is better philosophy reached its most hilariously dangerous peak. Somebody, somewhere deep in Chevrolet's engineering department, must have asked the most irresponsible question imaginable. What if we took the brutal LS5 454 cubic inch V8, fresh off the Corvette and Chevelle SS assembly lines, and stuffed it into our biggest, heaviest, wood-paneled family station wagon? And what if we didn't bother upgrading the suspension or the brakes to match? The result was a 7-passenger cruise missile, a mobile suburban death wish masquerading as a responsible family car. It had 3 rows of seats, acres of fake wood siding, more glass than a greenhouse, and under the hood, a 450 horsepower big block ticking like a time bomb. Why would anyone order a Kingswood Estate with a 454? Were they mad? Were they brilliant? Or were they just determined to terrify their families in style? One surviving owner of such a beast put it simply, back then, if you were late to Little League practice, you wanted to make up time. The Kingswood made up time, and nearly made up a few funerals too. Mashed the skinny accelerator pedal to the floor, and the big Chevy didn't so much accelerate as it launched. An instant, roaring surge of torque that twisted the entire car like a damp paper towel. The rear tires, narrow and utterly unprepared for the onslaught, would let loose in a haze of smoke, while the front end reared up like a startled horse. One man who daily drove a 454 Kingswood Estate in the early 70s remembered the first time he floored it onto the freeway. It was like the hand of God shoved you in the back, and then promptly reminded you that you were driving a 5,000-pound brick with brakes made for a shopping cart. Because there was the catch. All that power, none of the preparation. The suspension was still tuned for maximum ride comfort, meaning it floated and wallowed over bumps, leaned like a drunken sailor in turns, and generally behaved like a beached whale when pushed too hard. And the brakes? Unless you specifically ticked the box for optional front discs, you got ancient drum brakes at all 4 corners. Brakes that might have been fine for a regular 350-powered wagon, but were criminally inadequate for a fire-breathing 454 monster. One former owner joked grimly, "You could go 0 to 60 in about 6 seconds. You could also go 60 to 0 in about whenever it felt like stopping." Driving a Kingswood 454 at speed demanded either supreme courage, total foolishness, or both. Steering was slow and numb, offering almost no feedback as the big wagon drifted vaguely across lanes. Body roll was measured in feet, not inches. And yet, if you could hang on, and if the road ahead stayed blessedly straight, there were few things more absurdly satisfying than seeing a Corvette driver in your rearview mirror, left wondering how on earth a rolling condominium just dusted him. And what about the passengers? Picture it, a family of 7, grandma packed into the rear-facing 3rd-row seat, screaming her lungs out as the wood-paneled Titanic rocketed down the freeway. Kids sliding across the vinyl bench seats with every violent lurch. Dad white-knuckling the steering wheel, grinning like a lunatic. Mom praying audibly. It was a rolling circus act, and everyone was along for the ride, whether they liked it or not. Still, for all its flaws, maybe because of them, the Kingswood 454 became a legend among those who lived to tell the tale. It was the ultimate sleeper, the ultimate rebellion against logic, and maybe, just maybe, the ultimate expression of American automotive insanity. An old Kingswood owner, now in his 70s, summed it up best as he leaned against his still surviving, battle-scarred wagon at a local car show. People ask me, why the hell would you need a 454 in a station wagon? I tell them, because there's no better way to get a speeding ticket and a child endangerment lecture in the same afternoon. Would you like me to spin a full scene for you? Maybe a Sunday afternoon run where a dad races a smart aleck teenager in a Camaro SS with the whole family screaming and sliding around in the back of the Kingswood. I could really bring it to life if you want. The 1977 Dodge Monaco 440 Police Interceptor was the quintessential muscle car dressed in blue, built for one thing and one thing only: catching criminals and making sure they never got away. But underneath the beefy exterior, there was a different kind of beast. It wasn't designed to be pretty or refined. It wasn't made for smooth rides or sharp cornering. The Monaco was a hulking high-speed chase machine that demanded a certain kind of driving. And when it came to handling, well, let's just say you didn't drive it so much as wrestle it, often at terrifying speeds. The heart of this beast was the 440 cubic inch V8, the same engine that had powered some of the most iconic muscle cars of the era. In the Monaco, it churned out a solid 225 horsepower, modest by modern standards, but more than enough to propel this 2-ton beast past 130 mph on a straightaway. That's a remarkable feat for a car that weighed nearly as much as a full-size freight train truck and was designed to plow through traffic while still being able to keep up with the criminals it was after. But as fast as it was in a straight line, things got complicated and downright dangerous when the road curved. The Monaco's suspension was built for durability, not agility. The frame was reinforced, designed to take a beating from punishing high-speed pursuits, but it was far from refined. The steering was heavy and slow, giving no real feedback about what the front wheels were doing, just a vague sense of where the car might be pointing. And that was fine when you were driving through city streets in a straight line, cornering at 90-degree angles, or barreling down empty highways in pursuit of a suspect. But once you pushed the Monaco into a real curve, the results were catastrophic. With its rear-heavy design, big block engine, and soft suspension, the Monaco was a disaster waiting to happen when it came to handling. On bias-plied tires, the rear end was prone to breaking loose in sharp turns. Oversteering in a 2-ton cruiser was no small task. The rear tires, unprepared for the massive weight and torque from the 440, would squirm under hard acceleration, and with every inch of the wheel you turned, the car responded like a drunk sailor trying to get his bearings. A flick of the gas pedal too hard in a tight corner, and the Monaco would spin out faster than you could say, Code 3. One veteran cop who had spent several years behind the wheel of a Monaco Interceptor during the late 70s remembered the first time he nearly took out a tree during a pursuit. "We were chasing this guy who thought he was the next Steve McQueen, but when I had to make that sharp left to get around a barrier, that was when I realized I wasn't driving the car. I was trying to control a freight train with a slingshot attached to the front." He laughed grimly. If you weren't careful, it would star in its own crash scene, and sometimes you didn't even have to do anything. The car would just decide to go off on its own. Then there was the issue of braking. The Monaco Interceptor wasn't exactly equipped with precision braking systems that matched its raw power. With heavy-duty drum brakes designed to withstand the stresses of chase conditions, they were more focused on durability than stopping power. They would fade under heavy use, and stopping from high speeds wasn't exactly a smooth affair. The car's sheer mass made any hard stop feel like an uphill battle, requiring more than a little faith in the system as the car lurched to a halt. When it came to stopping on a dime, the Monaco wasn't so much an interceptor as it was a rolling wrecking ball. Still, despite its flaws, the Monaco was beloved by the men and women who had to trust it with their lives on the job. There was something undeniably satisfying about hearing that 440 roar to life, knowing it could deliver enough speed to catch up to just about anything on the road. And for all its terrifying handling quirks, there was a certain pride in knowing that this was a car made to withstand the chaos of a high-speed pursuit, built with a sense of purpose that no other car on the road could match. As one retired officer explained it, "You didn't drive the Monaco, you survived it. It wasn't graceful, it wasn't easy, but when that siren came on and the gas pedal went down, you knew there was no other car that could do the job faster, even if you weren't sure if you'd make it through the turn alive." The 1977 Dodge Monaco 440 Police Interceptor wasn't about handling finesse or luxury. It wasn't about cornering like a sports car. It was a blunt instrument, a tool of the law that got the job done, but not without a few heart-stopping moments along the way. And for those brave enough to get behind the wheel, the Monaco was an experience that was unforgettable, for better or for worse. The 1972 Buick Centurion 455 was a car that, in many ways, represented the end of an era where brute force and raw power were the order of the day. And Buick, ever the fan of big, luxurious land yachts, pulled no punches when it came to the Centurion. This was a car that could send a wave of excitement through anyone who heard the rumble of its massive 455 cubic inch V8 engine. A true muscle car under the glossy veneer of comfort and luxury, the Centurion was built like a tank, but with all the maneuverability of a battleship. Under the long chrome-heavy hood, the 455 engine churned out 320 horsepower and 510 lb of torque. This was the kind of engine that didn't need to scream for attention. It just was. Press the accelerator, and the Centurion's massive frame would leap forward, the rear tires spinning for a moment before digging into the pavement with all the fury of a wild beast freed from its cage. In a straight line, it was a terrifying force of nature, effortlessly outpacing nearly anything else on the road. It could burn rubber with ease, and for a car that weighed around 4,000 pounds, that was nothing short of impressive. But as with all powerful machines, the Centurion had its flaws. And oh, were they glaring. When it came to cornering, the Centurion was less a nimble athlete and more a lumbering behemoth. The suspension was set up for smooth, comfortable cruising, not for hard, aggressive turns. The body leaned like a ship in a storm when you attempted to navigate through tight corners. One owner of a 1972 Centurion summed it up with brutal honesty. Trying to turn that car was like trying to turn a double-decker bus on a bicycle path. There's no real steering, just a lot of hoping. Maneuverability was a foreign concept to the Centurion. With its front heavyweight distribution and soft suspension, sudden changes in direction caused the car to pitch and yaw like a heavy ship on a turbulent sea. If you were unlucky enough to take a sharp corner too quickly, the tires would howl in protest and the body would lean to the point where you thought it might just tip over. But somehow it always held on, at least until the next corner. For those brave or foolish enough to test its limits, the result was often a tense, white-knuckled drive, with the Centurion fighting its driver every step of the way. It was the kind of car where you were constantly on edge, praying it would make it through the turn without sending you into a guardrail. And that's not even touching on wet roads. The Centurion's sheer size and weight, combined with its bias-ply tires, meant that it was a nightmare on anything but dry pavement. Once the rain hit, the car became a different beast altogether. One owner, recalling his time driving the Centurion in stormy weather, said it was like driving a waterlogged yacht. The back end would slide like it was on ice, and no matter how much you tried to correct, it just didn't want to go where you told it to. The immense torque from the 455 would easily overwhelm the tires in the wet, sending the rear end fishtailing at even the slightest touch of the gas. On slick roads, driving the Centurion became an act of pure survival. And then there was braking. The Centurion wasn't exactly blessed with top-of-the-line braking technology. With its heavy body and relatively unremarkable drum brakes, sudden stops were nothing short of an event. If you needed to come to a quick halt, you better have a plan B. A former driver explained it succinctly. You'd press the pedal and feel it squish down like a sponge. It was like asking an elephant to stop on a dime. If you were lucky, you'd come to a stop before hitting anything. And if not, well, you had enough time to say a quick prayer. But despite its many flaws, the Centurion had a certain undeniable charm. It was a car that commanded attention, that announced its presence with a low, rumbling growl from the engine and the intimidating presence of its massive frame. The Centurion was a car for those who didn't mind a little or a lot of risk in exchange for raw power and luxury. Its straight-line performance was nearly unmatched for its size, and it could cruise comfortably on long road trips with a level of plushness that few cars could rival. The interior was spacious and appointed with plush seating, wood trim, and enough creature comforts to make even the longest trips feel like a joyride, as long as you didn't have to navigate anything remotely tricky. One longtime owner reflected nostalgically, "Yeah, it was a handful, but I've never driven anything that felt so authoritative. When you put your foot down, the world just moved out of the way." Sure, it couldn't take a curve to save its life, but who needs curves when you have got power like that? The 1972 Buick Centurion 455 was, in essence, a car built for power, with every other aspect of its design secondary. The 1966 Mercury Comet Cyclone GT 390 was an underrated terror, a sleeper with the soul of a lion and the handling characteristics of a toddler on roller skates. It wasn't the car that garnered the kind of legendary attention of the Mustang or the Chevelle, but for those in the know, it was a fire-breathing monster that would eat up the road in a blink, as long as you were prepared to hang on for dear life. Under the hood of the Cyclone GT was a 390 cubic inch V8, pumping out 335 horsepower, an impressive figure in an era filled with some of the most ferocious muscle cars in history. But this wasn't a refined powerhouse. It was a raw, untamed beast crammed into a lightweight, compact frame. The power-to-weight ratio was aggressive, the kind of formula that made straight-line speed a joy and terror in equal measure. Mash the gas and the car would leap forward, its rear tires struggling to keep up with the engine's unrelenting torque, flinging gravel and rubber onto the road. The engine was eager to give it all, and the small, lightweight frame made the experience even more thrilling. But here's where the Cyclone GT earned its reputation as a terror: handling. To put it simply, the handling was, well, it wasn't. The car was built for one thing, to go fast in a straight line. But if you tried to take it around a corner at anything approaching speed, you were in for a ride that would make you question all your life choices. The suspension was basic at best, with leaf springs and simple shocks that did little to control the wild power of the 390 V8. The steering was vague and uncommunicative, offering little in the way of feedback as you turned the wheel. The rear end, light and eager, was ready to break loose at the slightest provocation. Power slides weren't a trick or a skill. They were simply inevitable. One owner who had grown up with a Cyclone GT in the late 60s described it with the kind of nostalgia that comes from years of surviving its unpredictable nature. The thing would just whip around on you. You'd hit the ground and feel the rear end just kick out from under you, and you'd have to fight it just to keep it in line. But it wasn't about being in control. It was about surviving the ride. And the ride could be brutal. The Cyclone GT didn't offer any kind of grace or finesse when cornering. It was a fight, a constant battle between you and the car to keep it from spinning out, or worse, tipping over. In the wet, it was a whole other beast entirely. Rain-soaked roads turned the Cyclone GT into a road-hugging missile, the rear tires just begging to lose traction at the slightest hint of throttle. A casual stomp on the accelerator in a turn would send the car drifting, tires screeching in protest as you tried and failed to correct it. The back end would start swinging like it had a mind of its own, remembered one former owner. The only thing you could do was steer into it and hope you didn't hit a tree. Power slides? Sure, if you didn't mind using the neighbor's mailbox as a brake. The primitive handling wasn't just limited to turns, though. Sudden stops were an even bigger problem. With a heavy, powerful engine and limited braking capabilities, the Comet had standard drum brakes, which were fine for everyday driving, but woefully inadequate for aggressive muscle car performance. Bringing the Cyclone GT to a stop after a spirited run was a dicey proposition. The car's sheer mass combined with the lack of modern braking technology meant that every panic stop felt like an event. One former driver recalled, "The brakes? Forget it. You'd get a panic stop, and by the time you realized you weren't slowing down fast enough, it was too late." It was all about hoping you didn't crash into the car in front of you, or anything else for that matter. But there was something undeniably captivating about the Cyclone GT, something that made it a favorite among those who were in the know. It was a pure muscle car, unrefined and unruly, built for straight-line speed and chaos rather than comfort or precision. The GT's engine was a masterpiece of brute force, its lightweight frame perfect for delivering speed and bursts of adrenaline. And for all its flaws, it provided an experience that no other car on the road could replicate. It wasn't easy to drive, it didn't always behave, and it didn't have the refined handling of its competitors. But when you were behind the wheel, there was a raw thrill in knowing that this car could tear down a straightaway like few others could, and that you'd have to fight it every step of the way. An old-time owner, recalling his days with the Cyclone GT, summed it up perfectly. "I don't know if it was the Keisha or the driver, but one thing's for sure. When you floored that thing, you weren't just driving. You were surviving a battle, one power slide at a time." The 1973 Chevrolet Laguna 454 was a car built for a different kind of dream, a kind of muscle car fantasy where sleek, curvaceous lines promised performance and excitement. On paper, it looked the part of a sporty, aggressive road machine. It was a car designed to turn heads with its wide stance, the smooth flow of its design, and the promise of raw American muscle under the hood. And in a straight line, it delivered. The Laguna could be ordered with the LS4 454 V8, a monstrous 454 cubic inch engine producing 270 horsepower, a figure that was impressive in its own right, even though the muscle car craze was slowing down thanks to increasingly strict emissions regulations. This engine was big, bold, and powerful, capable of accelerating the Laguna with surprising ferocity. The sound of the 454's roar was enough to send shivers down anyone's spine. And on a straight road, the Laguna felt like a beast unleashed, tearing down the asphalt at speeds that could put any other car on the road to shame. The power was undeniable, brutal, effortless, and commanding. The kind of engine that could rip through gears and lunge forward at a speed that could give a seasoned driver whiplash. For those moments, the Laguna was everything a muscle car should be. But then, on came the reality. The Laguna's Achilles heel wasn't its engine, it was the suspension. Underneath the beautiful exterior, the Laguna was a complete contradiction. While the LS4 454 was designed to deliver thrilling power, the car's soft suspension was geared more toward comfort than handling. And that was a problem. The suspension didn't provide the kind of stability required to tame the raw power of the engine. The car felt loose, unrefined, and dangerously prone to body roll. On hard corners, the Laguna didn't so much grip the road as it slid across it. The rear end had a tendency to break loose, sending the car into unpredictable oversteer if you dared to push it hard enough. But even if you didn't push the car to its limits, it still felt like it was constantly on the edge of control. One longtime owner of a 1973 Laguna described the experience as driving a freight train on roller skates. You'd go into a corner and the body would lean like it was ready to tip over. You'd hit the gas just a little bit and the rear end would try to pass the front. You could feel the car working against you, like it was trying to throw you into the guardrails. It wasn't just about fast driving, it was about holding on for dear life. And the brakes? Let's just say they were more of a suggestion than an actual performance feature. With the car's massive 454 V8 engine and its hefty weight, the braking system was quickly overwhelmed under any kind of spirited driving. The Laguna was equipped with standard disc brakes in the front and drums in the rear, but these weren't designed to bring a car like the Laguna to a stop in a hurry. They were fine for leisurely drives, but when you were trying to stop quickly from high speeds, they'd fade quickly, leaving you with a dangerously long stopping distance. A quick burst of acceleration on a straightaway might be exhilarating, but the realization that the brakes weren't quite up to the task of stopping that much metal at those kinds of speeds was a sobering thought. I once had to slam on the brakes to avoid hitting a truck at a light, recalled another owner. It felt like I was pushing down on a sponge, not a brake pedal. By the time it slowed down enough, I was halfway through the intersection. Thank God I had the reflexes of a cat, but if I'd been driving anything else, I'm not sure I'd have made it. The combination of overpowered acceleration, lackluster handling, and ineffective braking turned the Laguna into a car that was best enjoyed in short bursts, at a relaxed pace, and definitely not when any sort of high-speed, high-performance driving was required. It wasn't the car you'd take out for a thrilling drive on your favorite twisty back roads. It was the car you'd take on a straight, open highway, hoping for a soft, scenic ride rather than the thrills it promised. One Laguna owner put it best: "I loved that car for what it could do in a straight line. But once you turned the wheel, it was like asking a bull to dance. It'd give you some kind of crazy ride, but it wasn't going to be pretty. Handling wasn't an option. If you were lucky, you'd just get a little drift. If you weren't, you'd be meeting the guardrail pretty soon. The 1973 Chevrolet Laguna 454 was a car of contradictions. It looked like it could take on anything, but in practice, it was a reminder that raw power isn't enough without the right systems to handle it. It was a car that could easily turn a fun drive into a game of Russian roulette, where every turn was a roll of the dice, and the consequences of getting it wrong were all too real. Beautiful curves, deadly turns. The Laguna was the muscle car you didn't trust. But paradoxically, the 1969 AMC MX390 was the kind of muscle car that could leave your pulse racing and your stomach in knots, all within the same quarter mile. With a 390 cubic inch V8 engine delivering a potent 315 horsepower, it was an absolute beast on the straights, brutally quick and seemingly unafraid to break the laws of physics. In the world of muscle cars, the AMX was unique. It wasn't the usual bloated land yacht designed for cruising down the highway. It was a compact two-seater muscle machine, engineered to throw you back in your seat with every press of the accelerator. The AMX was a bold attempt by AMC to carve out a space for itself in the world of American muscle, competing with the likes of the Mustang, Camaro, and Challenger. But unlike those cars, which tended to favor either straight-line performance or track-worthy handling, the AMX tried to balance both in a smaller, more agile package. The result? A car that could tear down a straightaway with the best of them, but at the same time had the twitchy handling of a nervous racehorse. It was the AMX's short wheelbase, a key factor in its compact and aggressive stance, that gave it its agility, but it also made it unpredictably prone to snap spins and sudden loss of control. On paper, the AMX's short wheelbase was an asset, making it feel nimble and quick to respond to steering inputs. In reality, it meant that the car's rear end had a tendency to get a little too eager to break loose, especially when the driver tried to push it hard. One owner recounted a harrowing moment. You'd put your foot down and the car would just shoot forward like a rocket, no hesitation. But if you tried to turn a corner too quickly, boom, the rear end would kick out, and it was like you were suddenly trying to drive on ice. 1 second, you're in control, the next you're in a spin, and there's no warning. This was the car that could snap on you, fast and without mercy. The 390 V8 made it terrifyingly quick, with the kind of raw power that made you feel like you were riding a beast that barely wanted to be tamed. But with that power came a level of responsibility that most drivers couldn't handle. The AMX was a muscle car built for the bold, those who understood that in the world of speed, control was just an illusion. It wasn't a car you'd drive carelessly, it was a car you respected, a car that demanded the driver's full attention every single second. Those who pushed the AMX too hard found out the hard way that this was not a car to take lightly. A burst of speed in a straight line? Sure, no problem. But try to take a fast corner? Well, that's where things got complicated. The short wheelbase meant the AMX was quick to change direction, but it also meant that it didn't have the stability needed for high-speed cornering. The rear would twitch, then snap around violently if the driver didn't react fast enough. Owners had to develop a near instantaneous understanding of the car's quirks, because one wrong move, one too much throttle, or one too aggressive a turn, and the AMX would turn from a glorious muscle car into a spinning death trap. For those who could handle the AMX's quirks, it offered a thrilling ride, a kind of danger-laced excitement that most muscle cars didn't provide. It wasn't just a straight-line performer, it was a true muscle car with a personality. But for the reckless or unprepared, it was a car that would bite back, taking them to the edge and beyond. I'll tell you this, a former AMX owner reflected, that car kept you on your toes. You never got too comfortable. It was either you or the car. You had to learn how to read it. If you didn't, it'd be the end of your ride. The rear would whip around on you, and you'd be lucky to catch it before it sent you into a ditch. I had to replace the rear tires twice in 1 month just from all the spins. But when it was on, nothing could touch it. The AMX was a muscle car that reflected the era's love of raw, unrefined power, but didn't offer the safety nets of modern cars. Its handling was unpredictable at best, and at worst, downright treacherous. The short wheelbase made it a handful for anyone who thought they could handle the might of its V8 engine without giving the road their full attention. One owner summed up the AMX experience with a grim smile. It was the car that made you a better driver or buried you. There was no middle ground, and for all its flaws and frightening tendencies, the 1969 AMC AMX 390 was a car that lived on the edge. It wasn't for the faint of heart or the easily spooked. It was for those who craved raw speed, for the bold who lived for the thrill of the ride. But it was also a car that reminded its driver, in no uncertain terms, that the line between control and chaos was thinner than a hair's breadth, and if you didn't respect it, you'd find yourself on the wrong side of it. The 1974 Ford Torino Elite was the car Ford envisioned as a blend of muscle and luxury, an ambitious fusion of power and comfort. It was a big, bold attempt to offer the kind of performance that the muscle car enthusiasts loved, while also providing a level of refinement for those who wanted something a bit more plush. But in reality, the Torino Elite was the kind of car that tried to wear too many hats and failed miserably at wearing any of them. It was a paradox on wheels, a muscle car that wasn't quite a muscle car, and a luxury car that wasn't quite luxurious enough to be taken seriously. Under the hood, the Torino Elite was equipped with the 400 cubic inch V8 engine, a powerful unit that delivered 179 horsepower, which was a solid number for the time. The power was there, but it was buried in a heavy, sluggish chassis that didn't know what to do with it. The 400 V8 could push the Torino Elite forward with surprising vigor, but the car's response to the driver's input felt like it was always a step behind. The heavy bodywork and soft suspension made the car feel more like a land barge than a performance vehicle. And while it could muster a decent amount of acceleration on the straightaways, it was far from agile. But the real problems began when you pushed the Torino Elite beyond its comfort zone. The handling was lackluster at best and downright dangerous at worst. The car's weight, combined with its soft suspension, meant that the Torino Elite had the kind of understeer that would make you wish for a wheelbarrow rather than a car. You could feel the car fighting you every time you tried to turn. The front end would resist your steering inputs, the car nosing wide into corners like it was reluctant to even go around them. It wasn't a car that begged you to take it on a spirited drive. It was a car that made you pay for every second you spent pushing it too hard. As if that weren't bad enough, the brakes were ill-equipped to handle the Torino Elite's bulk and power. The car was heavy, and the braking system was designed more for comfort and gradual stopping than for hard panic stops or high-speed maneuvers. The result was brake fade, the kind of fade that only became evident when you were already in too deep. One former owner remembered the first time he realized how bad the brakes were. "I was driving through some twisty back roads, trying to enjoy the car, and I went to slow down for a tight turn. The pedal went to the floor, and I realized the brakes had nothing left to give. I had no choice but to ride it out and pray I didn't slam into the guardrail." That moment made me rethink how I drove that car. And it wasn't just the brakes that betrayed you. The Torino Elite, with its body rolling and swaying under the soft suspension, had a habit of losing composure at the worst possible times. The car felt like it was constantly on the edge of control, always threatening to slip out of line. At higher speeds, the car would seem to just give up and head straight for the nearest ditch, as if the laws of physics had abandoned it. The combination of understeer, brake fade, and a general lack of composure at speed meant that the Torino Elite was, for all its power, an unpredictable and dangerous beast once you left the straight and narrow. "I used to take it out on the freeway," said one owner, "and at around 70 miles per hour, the car started to feel loose, like it was no longer connected to the road. At higher speeds, I had to back off the throttle just to keep it from going sideways. I had the engine, but I didn't have the car to match it." Despite these flaws, the Torino Elite was, in many ways, a beautiful car. The design was sleek and striking, with its long, flowing lines and sharp, angular front end. It was the kind of car that turned heads, with a sense of luxury that could be appreciated from the outside. But once you were behind the wheel, that sense of grandeur quickly dissolved into frustration. It was a car that promised a luxury experience, but delivered the rough edges of a car that couldn't quite decide what it wanted to be. The 1974 Ford Torino Elite was the epitome of a muscle luxury misfire. It had the power to be a formidable muscle car, but the body, suspension, and brakes couldn't keep up with the engine. Driving it at high speed was a gamble, one that many drivers quickly realized they didn't want to take. The car's inability to stay composed at speed, combined with the constant fight against understeer and brake fade, made it an uncomfortable ride at best and a terrifying one at worst. One driver summed it up with a wry chuckle. It was like Ford tried to make a luxury muscle car, but they just forgot to make it actually handle like a car. You had the power, but it was like having a lion on a leash. You could feel it pulling, but you just didn't trust it. In the end, the Torino Elite was a car that tried to do too much, and in doing so, did little right. The 1975 Pontiac Granville Brougham 455 was Pontiac's swan song before the muscle car era was swallowed whole by the malaise that had taken over the industry. It was a car that stood as a reminder of everything the muscle car movement had been. Big, bold, and brimming with raw power. But by the mid-70s, that power was being channeled into an utterly misfit body. A giant land yacht built more for luxury and cruising than for speed or agility. Under the massive hood of the Granville Brougham sat the 455 V8 engine, a 7.5-liter powerhouse that, when unleashed, could push the big Pontiac forward with surprising speed for its size. The 455 produced 250 horsepower, a healthy amount by the standards of the era, though it was a shadow of its earlier muscle car siblings. But when you pressed the pedal, you could still feel the rush of torque pulling you down the road, as though the engine hadn't fully realized the world was no longer interested in raw muscle. It was the last remnants of Pontiac's performance history bottled up inside a car that couldn't quite figure out what it wanted to be. The Granville Brougham was a land yacht in every sense of the term. It had the size. It was long, wide, and heavy in the swagger, but not the agility. This wasn't a car designed to carve corners or take tight turns. It was built to coast, to float down highways, and to make a statement. The car's suspension, designed for comfort rather than performance, made it feel like you were gliding across a cloud, but when the road got rough or the speed picked up, the illusion quickly vanished. Handling was an afterthought in the Granville Brougham. It was like trying to steer a ship through a storm, the heavy body rolling under even the slightest steering input. And once you introduced speed into the equation, the car became an uncontrollable mess of oversteer, body roll, and sheer lack of responsiveness. I remember taking it on a windy road one day just to see what it could do. By the time I hit 50 miles, it felt like I was behind the wheel of a boat, a former owner recalled. The front end would lift, the back would sway, and you couldn't make a quick decision without the car arguing with you. It was like trying to steer a freight train, not a car. And while the Granville Brougham had the power to lay down rubber in a straight line, the car's size and lack of a meaningful performance-oriented chassis meant that it would have been dangerous to even try to push it beyond that. At higher speeds, the Granville Brougham felt unstable, as if the wind could blow it off course. One driver described it as riding in a rolling thunderstorm, where the sheer weight and mass of the car made it seem impervious to finesse. The brakes, too, were built for cruising, not for handling the demands of a muscle car. As with much of the Granville Brougham's engineering, stopping wasn't a priority. The car's braking system was oversized for the kind of casual driving it was designed for. But when the driver needed to stop quickly, the weight of the car would quickly overwhelm the brakes, leading to fade and extended stopping distances. A quick burst of acceleration was fine, but attempting to slow down from high speeds in an emergency was another matter entirely. Despite its handling shortcomings, the Granville Brougham was still a piece of American automotive history. It was a tribute to the grandeur and power that had defined the muscle car era. A relic from a time when power was prized above all else, even if it was now housed in a body that couldn't fully support it. It was big, brash, and showed signs of its age in every corner. But at its heart, it still had the 455 V8, a powerful reminder of Pontiac's final act of muscle madness before the muscle car era faded into memory. In its final years, Pontiac had tried to take its performance heritage and transplant it into a luxury car. The result was a bizarre marriage of two worlds, one of raw, untamed power, and the other of smooth, easy cruising. It was like trying to make a bodybuilder wear a tuxedo. You could see the muscle beneath the surface, but it didn't fit the suit. The car was slow to react, awkward at best, and an absolute disaster when pushed too far. Despite all its flaws, the Granville Brougham 455 still had a certain charm. It was the last of its kind, the final breath of muscle car performance before the era of fuel economy and emissions regulations took over. The last hurrah for Pontiac's muscle legacy before it was forced into the world of soft suspensions, smog-controlled engines, and luxury cars that felt more like living rooms on wheels than driving machines. One former owner summed it up best. It was a boat, yes, but it was a boat with a 455 engine, and that made it exciting in a way. It wasn't going to win any races, and you wouldn't take it out on winding roads. But when you wanted to just cruise, put the top down, the 1978 Dodge Magnum XE400 was Dodge's misguided attempt to recapture the spirit of NASCAR on the street, a muscle car with the flair of a track-ready racer. But the reality was far from what the marketing promised. Sporting the kind of aggressive styling that screamed performance and power, the Magnum XE had the outward appearance of something that should be tearing up the streets. However, under the hood and in the driver's seat, it quickly became clear that this was a car built more for show than for go. It was a flashy disaster, designed to make an impression, but ultimately failing to live up to its own hype. The Magnum XE400 was equipped with the 400 cubic inch V8 engine, a big, burly motor with the kind of raw power that on paper looked like it could perform. The engine offered a respectable 230 horsepower, which, while not on par with the high-performance models of the era, should have been enough to deliver the kind of performance the car was marketed for. The problem, however, was that the engine was too much for the rest of the car to handle. It wasn't just the power, it was the car's entire design that made driving it a frustrating, dangerous experience. For one, the Magnum XE was heavy. The car was built to look aggressive, but its substantial weight and sluggishness made it more of a chore to drive than a joy. It was as though Dodge had slapped a powerful engine into a body that wasn't designed to handle it. The handling was clumsy at best, with the car feeling more like a lumbering beast than a finely tuned machine. It was almost impossible to get the Magnum XE to behave on tight corners, with the car pushing its front end wide and the rear end swaying under acceleration. Even basic maneuvering was a struggle, let alone any attempt at spirited driving. But the real nightmare of the Magnum XE400 lay in its cooling system. While the engine was large and powerful, it had an inherent flaw: heat soak. The 400 V8 simply couldn't stay cool under pressure. The engine would quickly overheat, causing the car to suffer from performance loss and, in some cases, outright breakdowns. One owner described the experience with a wry smile. "I'd be cruising around feeling good, then bam, the engine would start to lose power. I had to pull over and let it cool down every few miles. It was like driving a furnace that had no intention of staying cool." The heat soak issue was a consistent problem for owners, making the Magnum XE less of a street machine and more of a roadside emergency waiting to happen. In addition to the engine's heat issues, the Magnum XE also faced problems with its suspension. The suspension system was too soft and under-engineered to handle the demands of the V8 engine, leading to a ride that felt uncomfortably loose and floaty. This lack of control only compounded the issues with handling, turning what should have been a fun, aggressive driving experience into a terrifying game of chance. Drivers who pushed the car too hard would often find themselves losing control on tight turns or under heavy acceleration, making the Magnum XE a ticking time bomb for inexperienced drivers. As for the brakes, they were about as effective as trying to stop a freight train with a rubber band. The braking system wasn't up to the task of slowing down a car with the Magnum XE's size and power, and as a result, brake fade was a constant issue. One driver recounts a harrowing moment. "I was on a straightaway, not even going all that fast, but when I hit the brakes, they felt like they were made out of cardboard. The pedal went all the way to the floor, and I had to let off, then try again. The whole experience was like playing Russian roulette every time I needed to stop quickly." Despite all its flaws, the Magnum XE was marketed with NASCAR-inspired ads that depicted it as a high-performance, street-level version of the racing cars seen on TV. Dodge wanted buyers to believe they were getting a slice of that racetrack action with a car they could drive every day. The reality was much different. The Magnum XC was a muscle car that had all the appearance of speed and power, but none of the substance. It was a car that couldn't live up to the promises made in the showroom. The car was all flash and no substance, said one disgruntled owner. I bought it thinking I was getting a muscle car, but all I got was a big, heavy, hot mess. I used to see it as a cool way to turn heads, but after a while I was just trying to keep it from catching fire or breaking down on me. In the end, the Magnum XC400's disastrous combination of heavy weight, poor cooling, lackluster handling, and ineffective braking made it more of a road hazard than a performance machine. It was flashy, sure, but in the worst possible way. A car that promised power and speed, but delivered nothing but frustration and breakdowns. It was the kind of car that was best admired from afar, because once you got behind the wheel, you quickly